Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for sticking with us on the last day and being here for this session. We really appreciate it. My name is Susie Squire. I'm the president of the Retail and Hospitality Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or the RH-ISAC. We have a couple of our members here. We represent the retail, hospitality, travel, and consumer-facing companies as their ISAC. How many ISAC members are in the room? Anybody belong to other ISACs? One, two, couple. Okay, I see my peeps in the back there. Thanks. What we do is an information sharing organization. Companies such as Target and our other members, information security teams, share their threats and what they're seeing into the ISAC, and then other members can defend themselves, block the indicators and things along those lines. We also share a lot of journeys, stories from anything from identity and access management to fraud and cyber threats and CTI. So that's a little bit about us. We have about 270 member companies internationally, and we're celebrating our 10th year this year, so congratulations to us. Thank you very much. So let me set the stage of what we're talking about today. The retail sector cybersecurity activities have matured significantly over the past decade, but companies continue to face persistent threats. In a recent Intel summary report that our company, the RH-ISAC, produced, sharing from members has moved the fraud-related threats down from number 10 to number 2 in the top 10 trends. So it's becoming a persistent threat that our members have to deal with. It's only following phishing. But the retailers are responding, as we'll discuss today. So joining me today, I'll introduce and I'll turn it over to them to give a little bit of their background. On today's panel is Ryan Miller, Senior Director of Cyber Threat Intelligence for Target Corporation, and Christian Beckner, Vice President of Retail Tech and Cybersecurity for the National Retail Federation. Ryan, why don't you tell a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Susie. Thank you all for being here. As Susie said, Ryan Miller. I'm a Senior Director in our Cyber Defense, or traditionally Cybersecurity organization at Target. I own cyber threat intelligence, cyber fraud intelligence, reverse engineering capability across our Fusion Center at Target. So we have that delineation between threat intelligence and fraud intelligence. Because there is different sort of focuses, different use cases, different bad actors, right, amongst them. But I think in some of my comments as we go on, I see that we need to kind of blur those lines, and that's kind of going to be a theme here. But I've been doing threat intelligence for a long time.
We'll leave it at that.
And cyber threat intelligence I've been doing for about 15 years. And that in itself has evolved, and the ecosystem as a whole has evolved, the threats have evolved, and that doesn't discriminate against fraud, right? And that's why we're seeing these results of organizations saying, this is becoming, or is, or has been a top threat. We just need to spend more time, more focus doing things like this, talking about it, how we can protect against it. We'll get more into that, but I'll turn it over to Christian.
So thanks, Susie. Christian Beckner with the National Retail Federation, NRF. NRF is the largest trade association in the U.S. for the retail sector. We represent everybody from the largest retailers down to small and medium-sized businesses, and engage in a variety of activities on every policy issue you can imagine. My role at NRF is working on technology and cybersecurity-related policy and engagement. We have a IT Security Council that's our member group of retail CISOs and other senior cyber professionals, like the RH-ISAC. That group is 10 years old now. So working, and we've had, over the past couple of years now, a very strong partnership with the RH-ISAC to sort of work together on retail cybersecurity threats, and now increasingly working on fraud-related issues as well.
Yeah.
And my background's more on the policy side. I'm a former Senate staffer and worked at a couple think tanks on cybersecurity in the past as well.
Great, thank you. So Ryan, I'm going to have you start us off and set the stage, as you were kind of alluding to, about the fraud ecosystems and what you guys are seeing and what retailers and hospitality are seeing in this space.
So I think the term fraud ecosystem or cybercrime ecosystem, we sort of differentiate between the two. And I was talking to Christian earlier. I think that's an industry thing, right? If you really think about fraud or digitally or cyber enhanced fraud or enabled fraud, it's pretty much the same thing, right? You take a a bad actor that develops a banking Trojan to compromise your computer, to compromise your banking credentials, to steal your money, right? That's a cyber criminal. But you have somebody that develops a bot to brute force your bank account, to compromise your bank account, to steal your money, but that's a fraudster, right? Like, we've generated this delineation between the two, but the bad guys, they just go and do, right? They just go, they act, they do what they need to do. There is no delineation, there's no boundaries for them. And so when we think about like what the ecosystem as a whole looks like, it kind of goes back to the businesses again, right? Like as we have evolved, as we've created this omni-channel approach, right? We've pushed our customers to be, and enabled a better or seamless experience for them. You can go and shop online. You can return things online. You can, move accounts online. All these things are enabled by e-commerce or, just this online presence. Of course, the fraud has mirrored that and shifted to that, right? So no longer is it all done in stores or a shortage or theft, and then products returned there. It can be done online, and so we're seeing cyber criminals, fraudsters, the bad guys, right, learn our operations, learn our flows to try to exploit that. So some of the major things we're seeing, right? I mentioned returns, right? Like now you can go to e-commerce site and you can say, I want to return this product, and they'll give you a label, just print it and return. You don't even ever have to go into the store to do this. That wasn't the case, 10 years ago. And so we've seen this major push to learn how to abuse that, right? Well, I'm gonna buy this product, probably with a stolen card anyway, so I didn't pay for it. And then I'm also gonna fake return this product. So I'm gonna abuse the flow that this company has to return the product, and I'm gonna send back a box of potatoes, right, which we've seen, or a box of rocks, or not return the product at all. I'm gonna manipulate the shipping label so it gets lost in transit, and then it's on the shipping company and not the sender or the retailer, right? So we're seeing this evolution, this sophistication happen within the fraud space that we have never seen before. And that is fueled not only by our presence online, but also the capability that the fraudsters are developing themselves in the digital space. They have better tooling, they have better capabilities, they have better visibility, and they're able to pivot a lot quicker as we put controls in. So we're seeing a lot of that. I think just lastly on that within the space, I think it all goes back to, signs go back to account takeover, right? Like that was one of the very first fraud, digital enabled fraud spaces, right? As long as there's been online accounts, there's been credentials that have been stolen and sold on the deep web. That's not anything new. But what they're able to do with these accounts is new, right? So it's not just I'm going to compromise the account and steal this credit card or gift card. Most companies have gotten good and locked that portion down. But if I compromise a good account, I can use that to facilitate a whole host of other type of fraud activities now, right? I have this very good standing aged account that looks good it's going to fly under the radar of fraud controls at the organization. So what else can I do? And we see them push these boundaries. So I'm going to use that and do a return fraud with this compromised account, or I'm going to transfer gift cards between these accounts because it's just going to look like a good customer doing these things. And so we're seeing accounts compromised not for the theft. Sure, if there's a card in there, they'll steal it, but that's not the primary goal, right? So all things kind of go back to ATO and having this pool of good standing accounts at the target organization to then be able to manipulate and do.
Yeah.
Yep. So adding to what Ryan noted, there's a third bucket that where you have risked the retail sector, and that we traditionally define as organized retail crime. And ORC, as the acronym is, distinct from sort of ordinary shoplifting. It's about stealing by organized criminal groups for resale, either online or in some cases moving things, resale in other stores, pawn shops, moving things overseas for resale. And that's another area where I think we're seeing a degree of convergence between what we consider as fraud threats, what we consider as cybersecurity threats, both in terms of thinking about who the groups are that are engaged in this, international, transnational organized criminal groups, and and a convergence in terms of tactics that they're using. And so that's where, there's sort of an increasing opportunity, and we see, companies sort of looking at this to bring together teams that are focused on the traditional loss prevention and asset protection side, together with fraud, together with cybersecurity, and working together to address these risks more holistically.
So following up on that, on the loss prevention, that usually that was their domain in handling fraud-related crimes, mostly in loss in store and things like that. And now with this growth, we are seeing not only the convergence of the threats, between fraud and cyber, like you said, we're the ones that make that delineation, they don't care, but the teams starting to work together. And Ryan, can you share a little bit about maybe even why Target took the approach of pulling things together, and maybe what has that, how has that helped both those who were on the fraud side originally and on the cyber side?
Sure. Yeah, it's a long journey, right? It's a very, very long. It's not something that just happens in a week, a month, or even a year. It's this is again, back to what I was saying. We've created this sort of delineation and this siloed approach, and so we've built up capabilities to do that. So you had a cyber team focused on cyber-enabled attacks, and you had a fraud team that was responding to traditional fraud that they would see, and maybe they had some rules engines to look for. Well, if it sees this, it's fraud, flag it. Inherently, that's reactive, right? Like it's looking for something that it knows already happened, or a pattern of things that had already happened. And so thinking about, well, how do you become proactive in doing that? And again, back to ATO, it started for us with ATO with, threat intelligence, identifying things that were happening in the underground. We have accounts for sale. We see these tools being built that are specifically built to go after our organization. The fraud teams weren't seeing that because they were responding to fraud that was observed in their engines. They weren't looking externally. And as we began to pull more and more of this information in, this intelligence in, and action that, we realized this is a bigger problem. And that's really how it started. I think to get to where we're at today, now, for Target, under cybersecurity, we have an entire fraud and abuse capability, right? So we've shifted from fraud being a business unit separate than security, and now it's together. Couple of years, right? It took to get there, but it started with a use case, right? We have to demonstrate that A, this is happening, B, this is the loss this is the impact, right? The loss, and C, this is how we think we can stop it, or what we've done to stop it. And then, hey, over a month, we had X dollars lost, that we stopped it, so we're saving the company, right? That is, you can't do that with a lot of you can't do that with phishing, right? So to be able to do that was very impactful. But at the core of it all was a couple of things. One, collaboration and communication, right? You have to talk to the other teams, because generally, as it's set up in the traditional way, they don't talk, or only talk when something bubbles up to the highest importance. So breaking down those barriers and forging those relationships, and kind of going on that sales pitch of hey, this is what we're seeing, this is what we do, this is what we want to do. That's step one. Number two is data, right? Everybody in the organization has different data or different views of data. Centralizing that data so you all have that same view and the holistic view, right? And when you're talking about fraud, that's not just, it's intelligence from the external space, but that's also everything that the fraud teams traditionally are seeing, everything that the customers, right? You got to understand the customer's accounts and have visibility into that. What's normal behaviors for this pattern, or this day, this time, this week? What's abnormal? Product launches or things that happen, and you say, do we have visibility into what's a normal sale look like? What's oh, this looks like bot activity, right? You have to have that seamless view of the data. And then the last step of that, once you get that, you can really start to talk on the same page. And then after that, it's how do we act on this? And that would be having some sort of engineering capability to say, let's build something, or let's go out to the product owners of our digital platform and say, you need to change this because this is how it's being abused. You can't, right? That doesn't just happen overnight. So it's a long journey, but talking to the right teams, getting the right people in the room, kind of
proving the case,
getting the data, and then I think at that point, right, like leadership has to come in at some point too to get that top down to say, yeah, this is what we want to do. And that's very from an organizational standpoint. I'm sure from a strategic, holistic standpoint, it's
Yeah,
much broader
and
than
let's
that.
talk about the policy and what you're seeing on your side with regulations and law enforcement and how that's changed over the years, Christian.
Sure. So from a policy standpoint, there's a number of sort of issues here at play. First is sort of making sure that law enforcement, both at the federal level and the state level, is paying attention to these issues and has the capacity to address them. And we've seen some good progress there over the past few years. Homeland Security Investigations has been a great partner to the retail sector to build complex cases against some of these fraud and organized retail crime groups. So we're happy about the progress that's been made there. We're supporting legislation that would create an interagency center to sort of make that more formal within the federal government and provide stronger support for state and local law enforcement for that. There was also a law passed a couple years ago that provides greater responsibilities for online marketplaces to have awareness of who the high volume resellers are on their marketplaces. So that is intended as a deterrent to the ability of some of these retail crime groups and fraud groups to sort of resell stolen goods online. And so that's now in place and is moving forward. But I also think this is an issue where we can't necessarily just wait for the government to ride to the rescue and help us. And a lot of the impetus here is just, where we need to be working together, and we are working together to try to address these issues, try to figure out where are the sticking points for being able to work together effectively. One of the things we're working on collectively right now is finding having greater sort of clarification in terms of how we even define different types of fraud, how like having a standard sort of lexicon and for different types of fraud, like you have in the cybersecurity domain with indicators of compromise under STIX and TAXII, having something similar to that for fraud, so you can compare like instances to like instances across different things. Working together on best practices for how you organize your fraud team and how you make sure they're working together with cybersecurity and loss prevention and as a sort of a collective risk function for the company and figuring out ways to break down silos. And a lot of good lessons from the Target team for that, but even thinking about how you scale that for a smaller company where you're talking about much smaller team and fewer resources to be able to address those issues. And then that's where we've the imperative to work together, through the ISAC. And, you have a fraud working group.
Yep.
We have a fraud working group now as well, and bringing those groups all together to sort of collaborate on all this as well.
Yeah, and I think it's like Ryan said, it's a journey. It's nothing, but I think the biggest thing is really, it seems silly, but getting the language, getting the taxonomy, getting people to, because it's been so siloed over the years. So making sure we're all talking about the same thing, using the same language, and what you collect is different on the fraud side, right? Than the typical indicators you would gather on the cyber side, right?
Yeah, and not only are the tactics or the indicators different. I think the unique thing about fraud is that at its base, like fraud activity is really just bad people abusing legitimate flows, right? Like an organization will have, you go to Target.com, I want to buy this product, I put it in my cart, I go through the checkout, I add my credit card, right? There's a flow for that, right? The fraud happens when they look at, well, if I just do this, and maybe we don't realize that they can do that, they figure it out, well, then I can bypass this step up or this control or this ask or this multi-factor, right? They find these things out that are legitimate workflows, right? And what is a legitimate workflow for Target is going to be slightly different for a Walmart or a Kohl's, right? Like, so fraud happens, it's very intimate to the organization, right? Generally, the tactic itself is, hey, we do this thing, but you see it all the time when they advertise, right? Like, hey, Target's hitting, it's hot, here's a method. Well, that's only gonna work for Target. And so you'll see it for a little bit of time, and hopefully we'll catch it and put the control in or change something, and they go away, and then they find something at another retailer, hey, they're hitting, let's go over here. So it's very, very intimate and very specific. at like a, the
Organized.
attack level, right?
Yeah.
But the concept of the threat is like, we want to do refund fraud. Okay, well, how do we do that?
Yeah. So what is, and Christian, maybe I'll turn it over to you, and Ryan, you can weigh in on this, is what is the hot topic in fraud-related crimes that are going on right now? Return as a service, gift card, so what ORC, but ORC is a result of a lot of these other things, So what are you guys seeing as kind of the top part of fraud that is keeping us up at night more than ever?
Yeah, I mean, one area where there's been a lot of focus in the last, particularly over the last year, is around gift card fraud. There are, now, public reports of some of the arrests that federal law enforcement has made with some of the organized groups engaged in very systematic, gift card tampering, then putting gift cards back on shelves, and then gift cards being drained as soon as they're activated, and that being, led by, transnational organized criminal groups, with ties to, money laundering and other types of activities. So I think that, that's not just an issue that sort of impacts retailers, but has a broader public safety, national security impact too that we're now seeing. And so I think that, but that's something, again, where we're working together, the companies that, retailers, the companies that develop and produce gift cards, others in the ecosystem, federal law enforcement, to work together to address those issues and tackle that. And I know, Ryan, if you want to add on that too.
Yeah, I think that you kind of glaze over that, and we talk about this all the time, but if you're not familiar with organized retail crime or the scope or breadth or capability of it, like what we're dealing with is orders of magnitude in a scale of like what traditional fraud used to be. And when you think about like transnational organized like gangs, this is a massive operation, right? Like when you think about, and again, I think that the number one right now is gift card tampering. It's so lucrative and it's such a large operation. It's a multi-staged attack where individuals that are conducting those attacks have no idea who the other people doing the rest of the attack chain are. They just get hired, they get hit up on Telegram or WhatsApp or Facebook, and hey, you want to make $10,000? Like, do this, and right, like so they'll go in, young kids, whoever, they'll go in, they'll grab cards off the shelf and steal them. That's their job. That's all they do. But then that gets handed off. They have no idea where it goes. It goes to somebody else who does the tampering with the card, replaces, right? They send it off, goes back. Then it goes to a runner who goes back into they don't know. So when one gets caught and like, who are you working with? I don't know. Some guy just texts, like some guy, Dave, right? And but they have no idea. And so tracking that is so difficult. And there are, as Christian mentioned, like we are working with law enforcement. There are major task forces set up to combat this or start to begin to really combat this. But we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of loss. And that's just in the fraud aspect, or stolen money from the people that pay for the cards that don't get it. Then there's the loss of the cost of the cards, the cost of the security to protect it, the cost of the reputation to the brand, right? Like, so it's orders of magnitude larger than what the face value of the dollar loss is. This is a problem, like if you were to say, oh, is it some low-level ransomware group, or is it like Conti or Alpha, Black Cat, right? Like the more sophisticated groups, like there is a differentiation between them, and you say like, oh, we need to protect ourselves much better here versus there. This is organized crime at its height.
Yeah, I think that that awareness to the retail community, I think, has been huge. Just like you deal with, you've had gift card fraud in the past, you kind of deal with it, but now it's to such a scale that, as you said, Homeland Security is involved, and it's a national economic issue now.
And there's also a key part of addressing this is building consumer awareness and public awareness too, particularly among groups that are sort of more vulnerable to some of these types of scams or incidents. And if you look at like elder fraud and some of the concerns, ongoing concerns there, and again, I guess it's RSA this year, so I have to mention artificial intelligence for your bingo cards, but all of these, all of these scams are better. Some of the AI tools. If you think about writing better phishing emails, better those notes where you're saying for your grandson has been or grandchild is needs you to wire money or send money or send gift cards. All these now synthetic audio to sort of facilitate these scams. All these capabilities are making things that seemed implausible seem more plausible. So I think that creates more of an onus for that sort of public awareness, public education.
The days of Nigerian prince are long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right. So let's talk about what we're doing, what retailers are doing to help combat it. Christian and the National Retail Federation and the Retail Hospitality ISAC have been working together on this. So maybe talk a little bit about the collaboration that we've started in a lot of those areas, whether it's starting from the beginning of taxonomy education of what's going on and how our teams are working together.
Yep. So as I mentioned, about a year and a half ago, NRF and RHISAC formed a formal partnership. We'd worked together on different issues in the past, but really solidified that sort of engagement where an ISAC doesn't engage in policy issues, and a trade association. It didn't make sense for us to be doing day-to-day threat intelligence as a core competency. So we're now sort of working together on a variety of issues and sort of encouraging our members to be members of both organizations and really take advantage of those combined resources. And we're participating in each other's events and council meetings and those activities. But on the and then that's the basis for project-focused work on a variety of issues, whether it's different benchmarking reports. On the policy side right now, there's a lot going on in terms of the implementation of the SEC rule. We have the CERCIA rule now pending, so we're very engaged in those issues and getting input from member companies of RHISAC as well on those things. But then but then finding ways to work together on, as I alluded to earlier, developing a better taxonomy for what fraud looks like, bringing together experts from, who work with both organizations to address those issues and just trying to, and then looking ahead, working on some of these public education and awareness issues too, going ahead.
Yeah. And Ryan, from your perspective, a member of both organizations, how have you seen the collaboration more, get better and just more of that conversations going on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, RHISAC has been tremendous, right? Over the years, we've been a partner for
founding member,
and like over time, you've seen it evolve. Organizations themselves are evolving. The collaboration and discussion and engagement is evolving. The external then partnerships from that are evolving, and I think that's where. Right, like that's the first steps, right? The beginning stages, because we can't combat this alone. Just like like you can't combat cyber attacks alone, right? You need intelligence, you need information, you need to understand like, well, what are you doing about it? How are you stopping this? Well, same thing goes in the fraud space, and so leveraging organizations like the ISAC, RHISAC, and the NRF to communicate, to collaborate, right? To hey, this is what we're seeing. Is anyone else seeing this? Like, I'm sending up the flag. Like, please help, right? Like, that's kind of where we're at. But even back to internal, I mentioned like forging those relationships internally. Same thing. We have to do that, and I feel like the partnerships have been tremendous, tremendously valuable.
You have to flex your muscles though. Like you got to jump in and do it, right? I mean, people have to jump in it because it's work.
It does. It definitely does. And we, within Target, it's baked into our workflows to, when we write an intelligence product or we discover a new threat, like part of that on the back end is packaging that up and sharing it with our peers. Like, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is how we saw it. And that's on the ISAC side, and right, like best practices, like what are we doing about it, or like is there policy change that can stop this as it gets as big as organized retail crime?
Yeah.
Right?
I think another thing the partnership has helped facilitate is, if you think about both the cybersecurity and the fraud issues and the retail crime issues, all of these are not just practitioner issues now; they're issues that company leadership is
Yeah.
aware of,
Sure.
is looking at from a risk management standpoint, from from an overall governance standpoint, and because we have strong engagement with the general counsels, the CFOs, the CIOs, in many cases the CEOs, we're able to sort of, make sure that the people leading the cybersecurity teams, the CISOs, the people leading fraud teams, that we're, raising their issues to other partners in the company who need to, have a stake in this now too, that they may not have to the extent in the
Yeah,
past.
the business owners and
Yeah.
stuff as where is that. Just so maybe a couple of quick takeaways. It's, again, Target's a large organization. It took many years for you to do this. What are some things that folks could possibly start doing to just start making those connections,
Yeah, I think, again, it's visibility. We didn't start with a robust team. We had a threat intelligence capability, and it really started obviously we went who's talking about Target? And it started with that, and then we started to see things that were outside of our scope of they're writing malware or there's Target credentials, and it turned into we were seeing things that were a refund method for Target or fraud related things that we really started to focus on. So visibility into the threat landscape is key, and one analyst can find a trove of things out there that are related to your organization, bring that in and figure out why is this happening and who do I need to talk to help stop this, right? That's at the base is just visibility. And then once you kind of build that up is really understand, can we formalize this? Is it valuable enough, right? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't for your organization. But I think it goes back to, again, demonstrating those use cases, demonstrating the impact. And if you can start to do that over time, somebody's going to listen, right? If you go to an engineer in your organization and say, your product is being abused in this way, and it's facilitating this sort of impact to the company, no one wants to have that on their shoulders. They're like, hey, this is my thing that I built. And so they'll eventually start to listen to you, work with you. Well, how do we change that? How do we stop that? And if you get those little wins over time, it snowballs, right? There's that effect.
Yeah. Anything?
Two things come to mind. I think first, just the importance of working to try to develop metrics, that are tied into, companies' financial performance. To the extent you can sort of quantify the business impact, the current loss, potential loss, that then helps to make the business case for investment in cybersecurity, fraud, loss prevention. And the other thing is, bringing together, making sure that, these different teams within a company are talking together and are working together. Oftentimes there's a bit of a culture clash. People in the, traditional sort of cybersecurity world are, different in terms of background, a little nerdier, a little more introverted typically, not always, but then sort of the people in loss prevention who come out of, store security and sort of have that, Paul Blart Mall Cop sort of look to them sometimes. So it's, so there can be that sort of challenge to get people to work together, but realizing you're all on the same team and the things you're working on are converging and you need to find ways to work more closely together.
Yeah, we'll open it up for questions in a minute, so if anyone has some thoughts, get ready for that. But speaking of the skills, have you noticed, because you brought fraud practitioners into the practice in the cyber side, right? Have you noticed a sharing of skills that they had some skills that you guys may not have had, and have you noticed anything in that?
Yeah, for sure. The hiring is very different, or the profile of kind of who you want to bring in is a little bit different than your traditional threat intelligence analyst, but there is overlap, right? At the end of the day, somebody that is good at investigating is key, right? And so I did hire a lot of folks from our assets protection team that were on the side of fraud that was kind of the to the right, where there's something happening and they're going to mitigate that, and they have really good open source intelligence skills, so they can learn how to track people, right? It's same way you track infrastructure for a phishing campaign, right? It's the same sort of analytic mindset. So that's the overlap, but it's very different specialized skill sets. And in terms of, I want somebody that knows how to rip apart some social media accounts and dive deep and find all the things that are associated with that. It's very different because fraud is very public facing, right? You have you have to sell or monetize, the thing that you're conducting fraud on, and that's, you have to interact, you have to engage, you have to advertise that. So fraud has this public aspect to it, which allows you to find the individuals themselves versus somebody that built a fish kit from, some country and sent it over. You're probably not going to find where that person's living.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Okay. So any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask? I think there's some microphones up here that you can. We have one willing victim. Love it.
I was wondering, to what degree do you think some of these threats and countermeasures could have been identified during threat modeling?
That's actually a really good question. I would say some of them have been identified from threat modeling or a pseudo, type of threat model. After the fact, right? It all kind of snowballed and fraud starts to happen, and then you realize that fraud, and when you really start to look into it, you're like, this is much bigger than this initial thing we did. And so let's stop the bleeding, right? Let's put controls in place. Let's stop this fraud. And it's after that, then you can kind of sit back and take a holistic approach to it and say, well, if that happens, if this type of fraud happened on this platform or this service or this capability, is it happening over here? Or maybe you hear something that's happening at this company, so let's get ahead of that. And that's when we have done that. You kind of go and let's do a threat model on our point of sale checkout. Let's do a threat model on our returns flow, right? And think like a hacker or think like a fraudster, how would they abuse that? So threat modeling definitely helps similarly to it does in software.
And part of the challenge with that is that these groups are so adaptive to different changes to sort of your operational sort of environment. So if you think about, the rapid growth in buy online, pick up in store, buy online, return in store, all of these other new models of the way goods move in and out of inventories and physical stores into the e-commerce domain, and then sometimes back to stores, that, and a lot of that changed very rapidly, at the start of the pandemic, and that evolution has continued to sort of move forward. That has, we've definitely seen fraud actors, criminal actors try to exploit the seams and different controls and protections that companies have in place to address those issues. Your risk engines may have worked in some cases for your older operating environment. Doesn't work as effectively as you shift the way you're delivering goods to consumers and engaging with consumers.
Actually, one of the best exercises that my team has ever done in the fraud space was early on. A couple analysts, they mapped out attack chains or attack flows for the types of fraud that we were seeing, so ATO, gift card fraud. They mapped out the tactics that they knew happened, but then mapped that to our specific flow, and then got with the product owners and said, like, we're seeing this type of thing happen at this point. Do we have a control in place? Well, yeah, we just added, a multi-factor, we added step up. So once we were done with that, we could look at the flow and see where we had gaps. Well, we don't have a control here, and we know that they're abusing it. So that gave us a priority to focus on across the different attack chains. And similarly, Christian mentioned that. That's kind of some of the basic thought process that we're putting into developing this taxonomy.
Yeah, and I think another key point to note is there's also, if you look at, retail transactions, there's also elements of all these processes that are sort of by third-party companies, whether it's you think about, payment service providers,
right.
last mile delivery companies, other logistics, so that's another, the third-party gift card companies. So that's another area where I think there's a strong importance for building those partnerships, building those relationships, and working with them as well.
Yeah, and what their controls and what their processes are. Yeah. Well, good. If there's no other questions, hello. There's a microphone if you want to just jump up or, okay.
Okay.
I'm curious, it's a big theme right now is kind of collaboration or converging towards collaboration. Kind of asking this from a self-interested perspective because my company does this all the time. Like we create silos and break them down and go back to silos. And I'm curious, like, if that's the theme, are there any concerns there? Like, are we concerned about risk that might start to develop as a result of that collaboration and lacking some of that specialization?
Yeah, I mean, I think for our organization specifically, that's always a concern, right? Because again, at the core, it's data, right? And it's payment or guest data, so there's PII, right? There's sensitive data there. Now we're saying we want to open that up so all these people can see these things and do these things with it. So, right, like, but that's baked into our discussion and the demonstration of how we're going to do that. And you know, if you have good engineers, right, like, so, okay, well, you can do access, you know, control, things like that. But once you get past this, once you break those silos down and sort of demonstrate the value, the key to keep it going is to have those teams continually engaged in that process, right? So it's not just breaking down the silos to talk and then say, thanks, we're gonna do this and do it on our own, right? So we're constantly, like, on the bigger initiatives that we have, like we have product owners now across fraud. So there's a product owner for ATO, and their sole job now is to ensure that cybersecurity, intelligence, engineering, the developers that own the application or service or product, all these people are included in messaging. We're meeting whatever cadence, right? Having these discussions. They're being brought in, being aware of the threat. We're sharing engineering like wins and what we're doing. So that's how you kind of keep it going back from a siloed approach. Like we all still have our day job to do X, Y, and Z, but this thing to combat fraud and be more open and transparent, it lives on because we are open and transparent, right?
Yeah. Thank you, guys, for joining us on the panel today. It's a great discussion. If you want to talk to any of us afterwards, we'd be happy to, but really appreciate it. Thank you for being here.